The air inside the university's Great Hall was thick, suffocating, and heavy with the overpowering scent of hundreds of cheap floral bouquets mixed with nervous sweat. It was loud. That was the absolute first thing that hit me as I stood in the holding area with the rest of my graduating class. The sheer, deafening volume of proud families chattering, laughing, and shifting restlessly in their squeaky chairs echoed off the vaulted Gothic ceilings. I was 29 years old, standing shoulder to shoulder with my fellow medical school graduates, waiting for the signal to march down the long center aisle. My heavy, velvet-trimmed graduation gown felt like a literal suit of armor under the blazing stage lights, but the cold sweat pooling at the base of my neck had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It had everything to do with the 3 empty chairs I knew with agonizing certainty were waiting in the 7th row. I had been telling myself all morning that I didn't care. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 5 in the morning and practiced my indifferent face. I told myself I was a grown woman, a hardened survivor who had just crawled through the most grueling, soul-crushing years of medical training known to human existence. I had pulled consecutive 3-6-hour shifts until I hallucinated. I had slept on the cold lino floors of supply closets. I had broken down, crying in stairwells over patients I couldn't save, only to wipe my face, march back out, and save the next one. I was tough. I was forged in the fire of emergency medicine. I did not need my mother and father sitting in an auditorium holding a cheap foil balloon to validate my existence or my accomplishments. But as the grand, sweeping orchestral procession music finally started to play over the loudspeakers, that majestic tune that instantly makes your throat swell up with emotion, I felt a pathetic, childish lump form in the center of my chest. We started walking. Left, right, moving in a sea of black gowns and green hoods. The crowd instantly erupted into thunderous applause, and camera flashes popped like a localized lightning storm. People were screaming the names of their children, their spouses, their siblings, waving frantically from the tiered seating. I kept my eyes trained strictly straight ahead, refusing to look at the crowd. But my peripheral vision betrayed me at every single step. I saw a father physically pull his daughter out of the procession line just to kiss her forehead and tell her how proud he was before she walked up the stage steps. I saw a mother in the 3rd row crying so intensely she was ruining her expensive makeup, clutching a wrinkled graduation program to her chest like it was a holy relic. The love in the room was palpable, suffocating, and entirely meant for other people. And then, as I approached my designated seating area on the floor, my eyes inevitably drifted to row 7, section B, seats 14, 15, and 16. I had reserved them 6 months ago. I had sent the gold-embossed invitations via recorded delivery. I had followed up with phone calls to confirm the dates and the parking situation at the campus. But there they were, 3 glaring, hollow, devastating gaps in a sea of packed, overflowing joy. My heart did this horrible, slow, sickening drop into the bottom of my stomach. It wasn't just that the chairs were empty, it was the crushing weight of what those empty chairs represented. They were a physical, undeniable manifestation of my entire 29 years of existence in the Alistair and Philippa household. A permanent monument to my status as the afterthought, the secondary priority, the child whose milestones could always be rescheduled. When my name was finally called over the booming PA system, Dr. Aloan, Bachelor of Medicine and Bachelor of Surgery, the hall offered polite, generic applause, the kind strangers give out of common courtesy. There was no specific cheer, no air horn, no one standing up, crying, and waving frantically from the 7th row. I walked across the stage, grabbed the padded leather folder containing my degree, and smiled for the professional photographer positioned at the end of the ramp. My face felt like a stiff, unyielding plastic mask. I shook the dean's hand, walked down the opposite flight of stairs, and returned to my seat. I sat there in silence for another 2 agonizing hours as the rest of my class crossed the stage, staring blankly at the back of the head of the person sitting in front of me, forcing myself to swallow repeatedly past the sharp tightness in my throat. I told myself I wouldn't cry. Crying was for people who were actually surprised by disappointment. And honestly, if I let myself be brutally honest for even a fraction of a second, I wasn't surprised at all. I was just exhausted to my very bones from hoping that just once, just this one monumental, life-changing time, I would be enough for them to simply show up, to truly understand the absolute burning sting of those 3 empty chairs. You have to rewind the clock exactly 12 hours prior to the ceremony. It was 8:00 on a Friday night. I was standing in the middle of my tiny, overpriced, incredibly messy studio flat in East London, trying to use a cheap handheld steamer to get the stubborn packaging wrinkles out of my graduation gown. I was feeling a bizarre mix of nauseating anxiety and pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I was finally crossing the finish line. My phone, sitting on the cramped kitchen counter, buzzed aggressively against the laminate surface. The caller ID flashed one word: Mum. I picked it up immediately, expecting a last-minute question about London Bridge parking, or maybe an argument about what time we were supposed to meet for the fancy celebratory brunch they had promised to host at their private club. Instead of a greeting, I heard the frantic, self-important sigh my mother always deployed when she was about to deliver bad news wrapped in a thick blanket of emotional manipulation. "Aloan, darling, listen to me," Philippa started, her words clipping together rapidly, completely bypassing any standard form of hello. "We have a massive, absolute crisis on our hands right now." My medical brain, trained to expect the worst, instantly went to health emergencies. My grip on the phone tightened. "What's wrong? Is someone hurt? Did Dad have another episode with his blood pressure? Are you at the hospital?" I asked. "Oh, no. Health is fine." She brushed off my genuine panic like an annoying fly buzzing near her ear. "It's Saffron. Her senior partner at the law firm just called her 30 minutes ago. They have a massive corporate presentation tomorrow morning in Zurich. A huge multi-million-pound merger they've been working on for months. They need her there in person to present the financial strategy to the board. She's in an absolute state of panic, Aloan. She is hyperventilating. She doesn't have the right power suits packed. She's stressed about the late flight, and she desperately needs moral support." I stood frozen in the center of my flat, the steamer still hissing loudly in my right hand, blowing a stream of hot air uselessly onto the blank wall. Saffron, my 6-year-old sister, the ruthless corporate solicitor, the undisputed golden child of the family. "Okay," I said slowly, trying to process the frantic dump of information. "Tell her good luck. Tell her to breathe." "But Mum, what does Saffron going to Zurich have to do with my graduation ceremony tomorrow morning?" There was a pause on the line, the kind of heavy, loaded pause that tells you exactly how little respect the other person has for your intelligence and your feelings. "Aloan, for heaven's sake, be reasonable." My father's voice suddenly boomed through the speaker, startling me. He must have been listening silently on the living room extension the entire time. Alistair never missed an opportunity to step in and manage a situation he felt was getting out of hand. "Your mother and I need to fly out to Zurich with Saffron tonight. This merger she's working on is worth tens of millions of pounds. It is a career-defining moment for your sister. She is stepping up to the big leagues. She needs her family there to help her prep in the hotel, keep her nerves calm, and take her out to celebrate with the firm's partners afterward. We are her primary support system." I stared at my pale reflection in the dark glass of my kitchen window. "My graduation is tomorrow morning. I am officially becoming a doctor, Dad. I have been in university and grueling hospital training for almost a decade of my life. I reserved your VIP seats half a year ago. You bought a new morning suit for this." "Oh, please don't be so dramatic," my mother chimed back in, her tone instantly shifting from frantic mother hen to deeply annoyed, inconvenienced parent. "It's a boring commencement speech and you walking across a wooden stage for exactly 10 seconds to get a piece of parchment. You're already a doctor. Technically, you finished your clinical rotations last week. We will post you a very nice gift voucher, and we can easily do a nice family dinner next month when Saffron's trial schedule clears up. You need to be happy for your sister's success, Aloan. This isn't a competition. It was never a competition because the game was permanently rigged from the very start. I was going into community medicine, a career path they considered to be financial suicide and utterly devoid of social prestige. Saffron was navigating the elite, high-paying circles of corporate law in the city, rubbing elbows with exactly the kind of people my parents wanted to play golf and drink gin with. "Right," I whispered, the fight completely draining out of me, leaving behind a hollow, aching void. "Have a safe flight to Zurich. That's my mature, understanding girl," my dad said, completely oblivious to the heartbreak radiating through my voice. "We'll send you pictures from the hotel. Love you." They hung up. The line went dead. I slowly put the steamer down on the counter, walked over to my unmade bed, sat on the very edge, and stared at the dark screen of my phone for a long time. That was it. My entire decade of blood, sweat, crippling student debt, and tears casually dismissed over the phone for a last-minute networking opportunity. When the agonizingly long graduation ceremony finally ended, the structured rows of chairs dissolved into a chaotic, joyous sea of tight hugs, happy tears, and endless family portraits. I stood awkwardly at the far edge of the crowd near the main exit doors, clutching my leather degree folder to my chest, trying my hardest to look like I was just waiting for someone who was stuck in the cloakroom line. The pathetic reality was, I was trying to calculate if I should just walk the several streets to my rusty 7-year-old Vauxhall and drive home to eat leftover cold pasta by myself in the dark. Suddenly, a slightly crushed, incredibly vibrant, and obnoxious bundle of bright yellow daisies was thrust violently into my face. "Congratulations, Doc. Try not to kill anyone," a familiar, sarcastic voice shouted over the deafening din of the crowd. I blinked, startled, and looked past the aggressively yellow flowers to see Caspar. Caspar was my absolute best friend since our undergraduate days, a brilliant, highly paid IT engineer who practically lived his entire life on energy drinks, complex code, and dry sarcasm. He was wearing a slightly wrinkled, light blue button-down shirt that he clearly bought specifically for today, and he was grinning ear to ear. "Caspar, what on earth are you doing here? I thought you had a massive, critical software deployment scheduled for this entire weekend," I said. "I did," he replied, carelessly shoving the bouquet of daisies into my arms. "But then I realized that my software doesn't know how to legally prescribe antibiotics, and you do. Therefore, you are the more valuable asset to my long-term survival. Plus, someone had to be here to make sure you didn't trip on your own overly long gown and end up as a viral internet video. Where are the parental units? I need to go shake Alistair's hand and actively pretend I don't passionately hate his collection of pastel cashmere jumpers." I looked down at the scuffed floor, the fake smile melting off my face. "They didn't come, Caspar. Saffron had a sudden corporate work thing in Zurich. A big merger. They flew out late last night to support her." Caspar's bright smile vanished instantly, replaced by a dark, stormy expression. His jaw tightened so hard I thought his teeth might crack, and he looked around at the empty space surrounding me, as if calculating the exact GPS coordinates to launch a targeted missile strike at my parents' country house. He didn't offer a hollow, pitying, "I'm so sorry," and he certainly didn't try to play devil's advocate to justify their terrible actions. He just nodded once, firmly. "Right, okay. Typical," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "Then it is an incredibly good thing I made preemptive reservations at that ridiculously expensive 5-star Italian place in Mayfair. My treat. Let's get the hell out of here." Before either of us could take a step toward the exit, a commanding, heavy hand landed squarely on my right shoulder. I turned around and instinctively straightened my posture to military perfection. It was Professor Imogen Sterling, the terrifyingly brilliant head of the hospital's accident and emergency department, and my primary mentor. She was an absolute legend in the medical system, intimidating, ruthless when it came to patient care, and fiercely protective of her chosen juniors. She was dressed in her full, elaborate academic regalia, looking less like a doctor and more like a medical deity descending from Mount Olympus. "Dr. Alowan," she said, her voice easily cutting through the surrounding noise with practiced, unquestionable authority. She looked intently at me, then shifted her sharp gaze to Caspar, and finally scanned the glaring, pathetic lack of family hovering around me. Professor Sterling missed absolutely nothing. She knew my background. We had spent enough chaotic 3 in the morning A and E shifts drinking terrible burnt hospital coffee for her to know the basic dysfunctional dynamics of my family life. She didn't ask where they were. She didn't offer pity. She simply reached into her robes and pulled out her smartphone. "Cancel your Italian reservation, young man," she told Caspar, though her tone was surprisingly warm. "Elowen is coming with me, and 3 of the senior consultants to the premier steakhouse on Park Lane. And you are coming too. We are celebrating one of the absolute best, most resilient doctors this medical program has ever produced." I felt my eyes well up instantly, the hot tears I had fought back so bitterly all morning finally breaking through my defenses. "Professor Sterling, you really don't have to do that. I know you have your own family to celebrate with. I never do anything I don't actively want to do, Elowen. You know that," she said softly, squeezing my shoulder with a reassuring firmness. "You earned this degree with blood and sweat. Now, wipe your eyes, take those obnoxious flowers from your friend, and let's go celebrate your future." Walking out of that stifling hall, flanked on one side by my fiercely loyal best friend, and on the other by the brilliant mentor who had shaped me into a capable physician, I realized something profound. It shifted the tectonic plates of my worldview. Family is not about shared DNA, biological obligation, or showing up looking perfect in annual holiday cards. Family is the people who deliberately choose to show up for you when the reserved seats are empty. My blood relatives were currently in Zurich chasing corporate prestige and money. My chosen family was right here, buying me an overpriced steak, pouring me champagne, and explicitly telling me that I mattered. And I promised myself right then and there, looking at Casper and Professor Sterling laughing together, I would never, ever beg Alistair and Philippa for a seat at their table again. Exactly 1 year after that bittersweet graduation day, I deliberately broke my own solemn promise. I swallowed my pride, pushed down the lingering resentment, put on a conservative navy blue dress my mother would approve of, and drove 45 minutes out to my parents' sprawling, immaculately manicured estate in the Surrey suburbs. I wasn't there for a casual social visit. I wasn't there to catch up. I was there strictly for business. I had spent the last 12 months surviving the absolute chaotic meat grinder of A&E medicine while simultaneously meticulously building a comprehensive business plan. My dream was never to join a cushy, high-end private practice in Richmond catering to wealthy residents complaining about minor hay fever. My dream was entirely focused on community primary care. I wanted to open a massive, comprehensive healthcare clinic in a severely underserved area of South London. A place that offered transparent sliding-scale payments based on income, full mental health integration, and dedicated translation services for the massive local immigrant population who were currently falling through the cracks of the system. It was a solid, heavily researched, airtight 60-page business plan backed by pages of demographic data. But banks look at a proposal with the words low-income community clinic and immediately slam the vault shut. I had been formally rejected for a small business loan by 5 different commercial banks. I was desperate to get this off the ground. I needed a wealthy guarantor or an angel investor to co-sign. Alistair and Philippa were sitting at their massive imported mahogany dining table, delicately picking at their catered roasted salmon. Saffron was there too, having dropped by for a free meal, furiously texting on her phone and looking profoundly annoyed that she had to be physically present for a family dinner. I waited until the plates were cleared, pulled out my thick, heavily tabbed binder, took a deep, fortifying breath, and pitched my life's work to them. I talked passionately about the underserved demographics, the projected high patient volume, the NHS grant opportunities, and the massive, glaring gap in accessible healthcare. I looked my father in the eye and asked them politely and professionally if they would consider being the primary angel investors or simply co-signing the bank loan for £250,000. When I finished my presentation and closed the binder, a thick, suffocating silence fell over the dining room. The only sound in the massive house was the rhythmic, mocking ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Then my father slowly put his silver fork down, carefully wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, leaned back in his custom chair, and laughed. It wasn't a polite chuckle. It was a loud, booming, genuine laugh of pure, condescending amusement. "A community clinic?" Alistair said, shaking his head and wiping a tear of mirth from his eye as if I had just suggested I wanted to run away to become a professional circus clown. "Aloan, please, for my sanity, tell me this is a practical joke. You seriously want me to sink £250,000 of my hard-earned portfolio into a bleeding heart charity case project for people who can't even afford basic health insurance? It is not charity, Dad. It is a sustainable, desperately needed business model based on high volume and mixed commissioning billing. It's real medicine addressing real crises," I replied. "Real medicine is dermatology," Elowen, my mother, Philippa, sharply interrupted, her face pinched in visible disgust. "Real medicine is joining that prestigious plastic surgery and aesthetics group in Marylebone, like we specifically told you to do last year. You could be making triple your current miserable salary, attending charity galas, and meeting a nice, successful surgeon to marry. Instead, you're working exhausting night shifts in a dangerous hospital with those people." She shuddered delicately as if the mere thought of poor people offended her sensibilities. "This whole superhero save-the-world complex of yours is just stupid, naive, and frankly embarrassing for our family." Saffron finally looked up from her phone, a nasty, superior smirk playing on her lips. "Mum is entirely right. It's genuinely bad for the family brand. I am currently closing massive corporate deals with FTSE 100 companies, bringing real prestige to the family name, and you're out there acting like a modern Mother Teresa in a rough neighborhood. If you want funding for your little charity, go beg the local council. Don't ask Dad to waste his diverse investment portfolio on a guaranteed, spectacular failure." I sat there, my hands pressed flat and white-knuckled against the cold mahogany table, looking closely at the 3 of them, my biological family. They didn't see a passionate doctor trying to save actual human lives. They saw a deeply disappointing financial investment, They saw a stubborn daughter who refused to be a shiny, compliant trophy they could brag about to their friends at the golf club. "I see," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, terrifyingly calm register. I slowly pulled the binder back toward my chest. "I mistakenly thought since you gleefully paid for Saffron's entire exorbitant law school tuition out of pocket and fully funded the £200,000 deposit for her luxury London flat just last month, you might actually believe in my career too." Alistair's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the wine glasses. "We invested in Saffron because Saffron chose a path of verifiable success, power, and prestige. When you finally decide to stop playing savior in the slums and start building real, tangible wealth, then we will talk about financial support. Until then, you are entirely on your own." I stood up, tucked my binder securely under my arm, and walked straight to the front door without looking back. Message received, loud and clear. "Dad, don't worry. I won't ever ask you for a single thing again." I walked out into the freezing night air, the sound of their dismissive, irritated sighs fading behind the heavy oak door. The intense humiliation burned hot and acidic in my chest. But beneath that toxic shame, a cold, hard, indestructible diamond of resolve began to form. I was going to build this clinic. I was going to do it without a single penny of their dirty money. And I was going to make it so wildly, undeniably successful that they would eventually choke on their own bitter regret. The next 2 years of my life were an absolute chaotic blur of dangerous caffeine levels, bone-deep exhaustion, and relentless, agonizing hustle. Because I had zero financial safety net from my family and a terrifying mountain of student debt hanging over my head, I had to completely fund the initial startup costs for the clinic myself. That meant working full-time in the central London Major Trauma Centre A&E, actively picking up every awful, unwanted, brutal shift the hospital administration had to offer. Holidays, weekends, 4 8-hour graveyard shifts, I took them all without complaint. I was clocking 80 to 90 hours a week minimum. I lived entirely off cheap pot noodles, stale sandwiches from the hospital cafeteria vending machines, and sheer, unadulterated spite. My tiny studio flat transformed into a chaotic war room, while my sister, Saffron, was constantly posting highly filtered photos of her luxury ski vacations in Courchevel and unboxing videos of her £5,000 designer handbags. I was sitting on my floor at 2 a.m. I was listening to advanced medical translation tapes while frantically charting patient files, fiercely determined to be fluent enough to speak directly to the immigrant community I wanted to serve without relying on a translator. I didn't have the luxury or the capital of hiring a fancy, overpriced healthcare consulting firm to build my digital infrastructure. So, I turned to the only person in the world who had always unconditionally had my back. "Caspar, let me get this straight. You want me to build a fully compliant, highly encrypted electronic medical records database from scratch?" Caspar asked me one rainy Tuesday evening. He was sitting cross-legged on my incredibly uncomfortable thrift store sofa, surrounded by empty pizza boxes, staring wide-eyed at the frantic, color-coded diagrams I had drawn all over my whiteboard. "Yes, and I need the patient scheduling interface to be fully multilingual, incredibly user-friendly for elderly patients who hate technology, and flawlessly integrated with the complex NHS billing systems," I replied, casually handing him another greasy slice of pepperoni pizza. "Oh, and the best part is I can pay you exactly £0 and 0 pence until the clinic is actually profitable. But I solemnly swear I will buy you pizza every single Friday night for a year." Caspar stared at me for a long moment, sighed dramatically, pushed his thick glasses up the bridge of his nose, and decisively opened his high-powered laptop. "Make it deep dish with extra pepperoni and chilies, and you've got a deal. You are incredibly lucky that I passionately hate the bloated corporate healthcare system almost as much as you passionately hate your terrible parents." For 8 exhausting months, Caspar worked his highly demanding 6-figure tech job during the day and meticulously coded my clinic's entire digital infrastructure at night. He built the secure website. He set up the encrypted local servers. He saved me tens of thousands of pounds I simply did not have. Meanwhile, whenever I wasn't in the A&E or sleeping for 4 hours, I kept relentlessly applying for municipal and health grants. I spent my precious days off sitting in cramped, poorly lit community center basements, conducting town halls with local neighborhood leaders, tired social workers, and frustrated residents' associations. I didn't just walk in wearing a white coat and arrogantly tell them what I was going to do. I sat down, shut my mouth, and asked them what they desperately needed. I listened to exhausted mothers crying about the severe lack of pediatric asthma care in the area. I listened to uninsured workers who couldn't navigate the system and were letting infections fester. I compiled all of their voices, all of their raw data, and I aggressively added it to my business plan. I was exhausted to the very marrow of my bones. There were nights I sat in my freezing car in the hospital multi-story and cried tears of pure fatigue before walking into another brutal A&E shift, feeling like the mountain I was trying to climb was entirely made of glass. But every single time I seriously thought about giving up, I remembered Alistair's booming, condescending laugh echoing in his dining room. I remembered Philippa calling my life's dreams stupid. And that anger, that brilliant, blinding, burning rage fueled me to turn the key in the ignition and fight for another day. The massive, earth-shattering turning point for my dream didn't come from a faceless commercial bank. It came from the very people who had quietly watched me grind myself into fine dust over the past 3 years. Professor Imogen Sterling, who had tracked my career intensely since the day she took me to dinner after graduation, called me into her pristine office one rainy Tuesday morning. "Elowen, sit down," she commanded, tapping a thick, familiar-looking file on her heavy desk. "I have been watching you work yourself to the point of physical collapse in the A&E, and I've read the extensively revised drafts of your clinic proposal you left on my desk. It is brilliant. The data is bulletproof. But let's be realistic. You are never going to get traditional banking support for this specific low-income demographic. They only care about profit margins. You need private capital. You need money from people who actually understand the systemic failures of healthcare, not just investment bankers." "I know that, Professor Sterling." I sighed deeply, rubbing my throbbing temples. "But I don't exactly run in billionaire philanthropic circles. My family made it violently clear they wouldn't give me a single penny, and my credit is maxed out." She smiled, a sharp, predatory, incredibly knowing look sparking in her dark eyes. "Your family's tragic lack of vision is not my problem, nor is it yours anymore. I made a phone call yesterday. Go home, sleep for 8 hours, put on your absolute best, most professional suit. You have a private meeting tomorrow at noon sharp with Barnaby Thorne and Dr. Amara Khan." I almost choked on my own spit. Barnaby Thorne was an absolute titan in the British medical supply industry, known for his utterly ruthless business acumen but also his massive, highly effective philanthropic foundations. Dr. Amara Khan was a legendary former trauma surgeon who now owned a highly lucrative, rapidly expanding chain of urgent care centers across the country. They were absolute heavyweights. The next day, my stomach doing violent somersaults, I stood at the head of a sleek, glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor overlooking the entire London skyline. My palms were sweating profusely, but when I opened my mouth, my voice was rock steady. I didn't pitch them a sad charity case. I pitched them a highly efficient, data-driven revolution in community preventative care. I showed them the complex demographic data Casper had helped me compile. I showed them the undeniable cost-saving benefits of preventative care in low-income areas, explicitly proving how it drastically reduces the financial strain on the city's major hospitals. I showed them the signed letters of support from 50 different community leaders. When I finally finished my presentation, Barnaby Thorne sat completely silently, rhythmically tapping a heavy gold pen on the polished glass table. He looked at me with piercing, terrifyingly intelligent gray eyes. "Your father is Alistair, isn't he? The senior partner at the accounting firm?" Barnaby asked abruptly, completely catching me off guard. My heart plummeted into my shoes. My father's massive firm handled the tax accounts for several major medical supply companies. I instantly assumed Barnaby was about to tell me he wouldn't invest because doing business with me would somehow create a conflict of interest or offend my father. "Yes, sir. He is," I replied. "I know your father quite well," Barnaby said, leaning back in his expensive leather chair, his expression unreadable. "He pitched me a ridiculous luxury golf course investment just last year. Talked my ear off for an hour about his brilliant rising star corporate lawyer daughter. He never once mentioned he had a daughter who was an A&E doctor actively trying to change the fundamental healthcare landscape of this entire city." I swallowed hard, keeping my chin high. "My family. We have fundamentally different philosophies on what constitutes a valuable, successful career." Barnaby let out a short, sharp bark of genuine laughter. "I'll say you do. Your father is a short-sighted fool, Dr. Elowen, but you are absolutely not. You have grit, you have the community's absolute trust, and you have a financial model that, if scaled properly, could disrupt the entire urban clinic system. He looked over at Dr. Khan. Amara, thoughts? Dr. Khan smiled warmly, the kind of smile that made you feel instantly safe. I've secretly read your A&E patient charts for the past month, Elowen. Imogen gave me access. You're a phenomenal, incredibly thorough clinician. I will personally fund 30% of the startup capital, and I will mandate that my facilities provide your clinic with all of our overflow diagnostic, ultrasound, and X-ray equipment free of charge. Barnaby aggressively slammed his gold pen down on the glass table with a loud crack. I will take the remaining 70% of the funding requirement, and I will personally connect you directly with my top supply chain managers, so you get every single medication and bandage at exact manufacturing cost. Let's go build a clinic, doctor. I walked out of that towering glass building feeling like I was physically floating off the pavement. The absolute contrast was staggering, almost comical. My own flesh and blood, the people who raised me, had laughed in my face and told me I was a foolish failure for wanting to heal the sick. These strangers, these literal titans of industry, had looked at the exact same dream, seen the immense value in it, and casually handed me the keys to the kingdom. They believed in me without hesitation. That day, standing on the bustling London pavement, the scared little girl named Elowen, who desperately craved her parents' validation, finally died. The doctor, Elowen, who was going to conquer the medical world, was born. The subsequent 8 months were an absolute chaotic, exhausting whirlwind of construction dust, endless council permits, and relentless interviewing. Armed with Barnaby's massive funding, we quickly found the perfect location: a massive, completely abandoned warehouse, sitting right on the crucial border of 3 heavily underserved neighborhoods in South London. To anyone else, it was a terrifying, graffiti-covered eyesore with broken windows. To me, the bones were absolutely perfect. With Barnaby's money, Amara's donated high-tech equipment, and Kaspar's flawless IT infrastructure magically tying it all together, we completely transformed the space. We ripped out the rotting floors. We painted the walls warm, welcoming, calming colors instead of that terrifying, sterile hospital white. We built a dedicated pediatric waiting area with actual educational toys and comfortable seating, not just broken chairs and outdated magazines from 5 years ago. We rigorously interviewed and hired a dedicated staff of 6 incredible professionals, including a full-time bilingual social worker whose entire job was to help our patients navigate complex housing and food assistance programs. Healthcare wasn't just about pills, it was about holistic survival. We officially named it the Haven Community Clinic. It was absolutely beautiful. It was mine. As the highly anticipated opening day rapidly approached, the hype began to build. We planned a massive, highly publicized ribbon-cutting ceremony. The Mayor of London had officially confirmed her attendance. 3 local news stations had caught wind of the project and picked up the inspirational story of the exhausted A&E doctor bringing hope to the forgotten South Side. Barnaby Thorne, Dr. Amara Khan, and my beloved mentor, Professor Sterling, were obviously seated as the prestigious guests of honor. And then there was the highly complicated matter of the guest list. Against my better, fiercely protective judgment, a tiny, lingering, pathetic voice of societal obligation whispered in my ear. They are your parents. You are doing something huge. You should at least extend the olive branch and invite them. So, a full 3 months before the grand opening event, I paid to have 3 beautiful, formal VIP invitations printed on heavy cardstock. I mailed them directly to my parents' house and Saffron's luxury flat. I honestly didn't expect a parade in my honor, but I foolishly thought maybe, just maybe, seeing physical proof that I had secured massive millionaire backing and official city approval would finally earn me a tiny modicum of their elusive respect. Week 1 passed, nothing. Week 2 passed, complete silence. By week 4, I checked the secure RSVP portal Kaspar had built for the event. 0 response from the Allister family. Finally, swallowing my pride one last time, I sent a brief, professional text message to my mother's phone. Hi, Mom. Just checking if you and Dad received the formal invitation to the clinic opening next month. I need to finalize the strict headcounts for building security and the caterer. 2 excruciatingly long days later, Philippa finally replied, not with an excited phone call, not with a warm message of congratulations, just a cold, dismissive text message. Yes, we got the card in the post. Unfortunately, that exact weekend is Saffron's luxury spa retreat in the Cotswolds to celebrate her making junior partner, and your father has a huge mandatory networking golf tournament at the club. We absolutely won't be able to make it. Have fun with your little project. Your little project. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone and, for the first time in my life regarding my family, I didn't cry. My chest didn't tighten. I didn't feel a single ounce of anger. I felt an incredible, overwhelming, beautifully liberating sense of absolute nothingness. They had just unknowingly given me the greatest gift a toxic family can give: absolute, undeniable clarity. They had drawn the final line in the sand with permanent ink. Without a second thought, I immediately logged into the high-security event database Casper had built. I searched for the names Alistair, Philippa, and Saffron. I highlighted them. I hit the delete key. I completely wiped their existence from the system. The event was strict list-only security. No name on the digital list. Absolutely no entry. I was permanently done leaving empty chairs for people who couldn't be bothered to show up. The morning of the grand opening finally arrived, dawning crisp, cold, and unbelievably bright. The sky over London was a brilliant, rare, cloudless blue. I woke up before my alarm, buzzing with electric energy, and arrived at the clinic at exactly 6:00 the morning, a full 4 hours before the ceremony was scheduled to officially begin. I desperately wanted to be completely alone with my creation before the absolute chaos of local media, politicians, and hundreds of curious community members descended upon it. I confidently unlocked the heavy glass double doors at the front entrance and flipped the main breaker, watching the lobby flood with warm, bright light. The freshly polished floors gleamed like a mirror. The distinct, comforting smell of fresh paint mixed with sterile medical wipes filled the crisp air. I walked slowly, reverently through the wide corridors, gently running my fingertips over the pristine, untouched examination tables. I double-checked the fully stocked, perfectly organized supply cabinets Amara's team had meticulously arranged. I booted up the massive central server Casper had spent countless sleepless nights perfecting. Watching the screens hum to life flawlessly, I eventually walked into my private office in the back. It wasn't massive, and it certainly didn't have an imposing mahogany desk like my father's workspace, but it had a large window overlooking the busy street. And to me, it was the most perfect room on earth. I walked over to the coat rack and took my brand new, heavily starched white coat off the hanger. I had finally permitted myself to order a new one. On the left breast pocket, embroidered in crisp, professional navy blue thread, it proudly read, "Dr. Elowen, Chief Medical Officer, The Haven Clinic." I slipped it on, it fit perfectly, like armor. I walked out to the front lobby and sat down behind the main reception desk, looking out the massive floor-to-ceiling windows that faced the street. I was methodically organizing the very first batch of thick patient files we had aggressively accepted during our soft pre-registration drive in the neighborhood. We were already fully booked solid for the next 2 entire months. The community had aggressively rallied around us faster and harder than I could have ever realistically dreamed in my wildest fantasies. It was beautifully quiet, the kind of peaceful, profound, centering silence that only happens when you know deep in your soul that you are standing exactly where you are meant to be in the universe. I felt incredibly powerful. I felt completely untouchable. And then, a massive gleaming silver Mercedes G-Wagon aggressively pulled up to the curb right outside my window, violently shattering my perfect peace. I frowned deeply, looking up from my neatly stacked files. The event absolutely didn't start until 10. The catering crew wasn't due to arrive for another hour, and the security team was just pulling into the back lot. The heavy doors of the luxury SUV popped open. Out stepped Alistair, my father, wearing a custom-tailored dark gray suit that easily cost more than my entire first car. From the passenger side emerged Philippa, my mother, her blonde hair blown out to rigid perfection, wearing massive designer sunglasses and carrying a leather handbag that screamed generational wealth. And trailing right behind them, holding a massive, obnoxious professional camera with an enormous flash attachment, was a man in a black polo shirt, a hired professional photographer. I sat completely frozen behind the reception desk, the manila patient file slowly slipping from my numb fingers and landing softly on the desk. My heart didn't sink in fear. It rapidly accelerated into a furious, pounding, violent rhythm against my ribs. They were here uninvited, unannounced, dismissive of my text months ago, and they had explicitly brought a camera crew to capture their fake parental pride. I sat completely paralyzed in my chair, watching the absurd theatrical production unfolding right on the pavement in front of my clinic. My father, Alistair, aggressively adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit, puffed out his chest, and pointed a manicured finger up at the large illuminated sign that read, "The Haven Clinic." The hired photographer immediately dropped to one knee, capturing the angle of the proud, distinguished patriarch standing before the impressive brick building. My mother, Philippa, quickly stepped into the frame, linking her arm through his. She tilted her head, flashed her perfectly bleached teeth, and gazed up at the clinic logo with an expression of manufactured maternal pride. It was so profound that I actually felt a wave of physical nausea wash over me. They were putting on a show, a pathetic, transparent, deeply insulting show. After deliberately ignoring my invitations, mocking my business plan, actively refusing to lend me a single penny, and literally telling me I was an embarrassment to the family brand, they had the absolute unmitigated audacity to show up on the morning of my triumph to steal the spotlight. They realized that the mayor was coming. They realized that local news stations were going to be broadcasting from this very pavement in a few hours. They realized that their daughter wasn't a miserable failure running a dirty basement charity, but the chief medical officer of a multi-million-pound community health initiative backed by the biggest medical supply titan in the country. Suddenly, my clinic wasn't a stupid little project anymore. It was highly marketable. It was an incredibly valuable social currency they could casually drop in conversations at their exclusive club dinners. Oh yes, our daughter Eloan, the brilliant doctor. We always supported her noble philanthropic vision. We are so very proud. I could vividly hear the exact words Philippa would use. I could see the highly edited photos she would post on her social media pages, raking in hundreds of comments praising her for raising such a wonderful, civic-minded child. The absolute gall of it made my blood run completely cold. They didn't care about the hundreds of underserved patients we were going to treat. They didn't care about the excruciating 8 zero-hour night shifts I had endured to get here. They didn't care about me. They only cared about how my hard-earned success could directly benefit their public image. They were parasites looking for a fresh host to feed their massive egos. I watched through the thick glass as Alistair finally turned his attention from the camera to the front doors. He peered through the tinted glass, cupping his hands around his face to block the morning glare. He spotted me sitting behind the reception desk. His face immediately lit up with a broad, commanding smile. He tapped sharply on the glass with his heavy gold signet ring. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed loudly in the empty, silent lobby. He gestured impatiently with his hand, making a sweeping motion for me to come open the locked double doors. He pointed to the photographer, then pointed to himself, loudly mouthing the words, "Open up. We want to take a picture inside." Philippa waved enthusiastically, adjusting her expensive designer sunglasses and clutching her ridiculous luxury handbag. They looked so incredibly confident, so entirely sure of themselves. In their privileged, twisted minds, there was absolutely no question that I would eagerly jump up, unlock the doors, and gratefully accept their belated, hollow validation. They fully expected me to be the desperate, people-pleasing little girl who would happily accept breadcrumbs of affection just to be allowed back at the family table. But that girl had died 3 years ago in a hot, crowded hall, staring at 3 empty chairs. The woman sitting behind the desk today was someone else entirely. I slowly stood up from the reception chair. I didn't rush. I deliberately smoothed out the crisp fabric of my white coat, took a deep, centering breath, and walked out from behind the desk. With every single step I took across the polished lobby floor, the heavy, suffocating weight of 29 years of constant rejection seemed to evaporate from my shoulders. I walked right up to the glass double doors and stopped, standing mere inches away from them, separated only by a half-inch pane of reinforced commercial glass. Alistair's confident smile faltered just a fraction when he saw the completely dead, emotionless expression on my face. He knocked on the glass again, harder this time, his heavy ring making a sharp, aggressive clacking sound. "Eloan, open this door," he called out. His voice was muffled through the thick glass, but it still carried that distinct, authoritative, commanding tone that used to instantly make me shrink into myself and apologize. "The photographer is charging us by the hour. We want to get some nice family shots in the lobby before the crowds and the politicians show up." Philippa leaned in close to the glass, her face pinching into a mask of fake concern. "Sweetheart, what are you doing?" "Open up. We drove all the way down to this terrible neighborhood just to celebrate with you. Aren't you happy to see us?" I looked at my mother. I looked at the expensive blowout, the flawless makeup, the diamond earrings glittering in the morning sun. And then I looked at my father, shifting impatiently in his tailored suit, fully expecting the world to bend entirely to his will. "Celebrate with me," I repeated quietly to myself. The words tasted like ash. I made deliberate, unblinking eye contact with my father. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the twisted satisfaction of an emotional meltdown for their hired photographer to capture. Instead, I gave them a very small, perfectly polite, utterly terrifying customer service smile. I slowly reached my right hand out to the heavy brass deadbolt mechanism located in the center of the double doors. I didn't break eye contact with Alistair as I gripped the cold metal latch. His eyes widened slightly in confusion. Elowen, what are you? I turned the latch to the left. The heavy steel deadbolt slid securely into place with a loud, incredibly satisfying, echoing click. I had just physically locked them out of my life. Alistair's face instantly morphed from confused arrogance to absolute purple-faced fury. He violently grabbed the exterior door handle and yanked on it furiously, rattling the heavy glass in its metal frame. Elowen, open this bloody door right now! I am your father! You do not lock me out! Philippa gasped loudly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth in shock. I could see the hired photographer slowly lowering his camera, suddenly realizing he was not here to capture a happy family reunion, but a very public, very ugly implosion. Still maintaining that same calm, chilling smile, I reached up and grasped the pull cord for the heavy, opaque security blinds that covered the floor-to-ceiling windows. With one smooth, forceful downward pull, the heavy gray blinds came crashing down. The loud, aggressive clatter of the plastic slats cascading over the glass entirely blocked them from my view, abruptly cutting off Alistair's furious red face mid-shout. The sudden silence inside the clinic was absolutely deafening, broken only by the muffled, pathetic sounds of my father violently pounding his fists against the exterior glass. I turned my back on the drawn blinds and calmly walked back to my chair at the reception desk. My hands weren't shaking. My heart rate was actually slowing down to a perfectly steady, normal rhythm. I felt an overwhelming wave of pure, unfiltered euphoria. It was the absolute most satisfying thing I had ever done in my entire life. The pounding on the glass outside continued, accompanied by the muffled, shrill sound of Philippa's voice yelling something unintelligible. Let them bang on the door. The glass was reinforced. They were making total fools of themselves right on the public street. I sat down, flipped open my laptop, and connected to the clinic's secure wireless network. I opened my email client and navigated to the drafts folder. Sitting right there at the top of the list was a message I had carefully composed exactly 2 weeks ago, anticipating that they might try to pull a stunt exactly like this. I had analyzed their behavior patterns for decades. They never passed up a free public relations opportunity. The recipient list was meticulously curated. It included my father's primary business email, my mother's personal account, Saffron's corporate law firm address, and was blindly copied to several extremely gossipy extended family members who had previously texted me to ask why my parents weren't talking about my clinic. The subject line was simple, professional, and deadly. Urgent security update regarding today's clinic grand opening. I took a sip of my cold coffee, read over the text one final time to ensure the tone was perfectly sterile, and nodded to myself. The email read, "Good morning. Due to strict building capacity regulations and mandatory city security protocols involving the mayor's attendance, please be advised that today's ribbon-cutting ceremony is an exclusively private, invitation-only event. Access to the building will be strictly controlled by a hired security team. The final guest list was permanently closed and submitted to the security contractor 3 weeks ago. This event is explicitly designed to honor the dedicated investors, hardworking volunteers, and loyal community members who have actively contributed physical labor, financial backing, and emotional support over the past 2 years to make this clinic a reality. I have attached the official finalized security document containing all 47 approved names. If your legal name does not appear on this specific document, you will absolutely not be permitted past the perimeter line under any circumstances. Thank you for your understanding, and I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Sincerely, Dr. Elowen, Chief Medical Officer." I moved my cursor over the send button. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess myself. I clicked it. Message sent. Through a tiny quarter-inch gap at the very bottom of the window blinds, I watched their feet. I saw Alistair abruptly stop pounding on the glass. A second later, both of their phones must have buzzed simultaneously. I watched their expensive leather shoes shuffle closer together. There was a long, beautiful pause. Then I heard the muffled, furious sound of Alistair screaming a string of curses that echoed down the block. I watched their shoes turn around and march aggressively back toward the luxury SUV. The photographer's trainers scrambled frantically to follow them. Doors slammed violently. Tires squealed against the pavement. And just like that, the parasites were gone. 30 minutes later, the heavy steel security door at the back entrance of the clinic buzzed loudly. I pressed the intercom release button, and the stark silence of the building was instantly replaced by the warm, chaotic, wonderful sound of my actual family arriving. Casper walked in first, carrying 2 massive boxes of incredibly expensive pastries and balancing 3 giant trays of coffee. Right behind him was Professor Imogen Sterling, looking sharp and terrifyingly elegant in a tailored charcoal suit. Barnaby Thorne and Dr. Amara Khan followed, chatting animatedly with the head of the local neighborhood coalition. Within 20 minutes, the lobby was packed with 47 people, the exact 47 people who actually mattered. These were the nurses who had volunteered to work the first week for free just to help me get off the ground. These were the local contractors who had given me massive discounts on the electrical and plumbing work because they wanted a clinic in their neighborhood. These were the investors who had looked at a broke, exhausted A&E doctor and handed her hundreds of thousands of pounds purely on faith and hard data. At exactly 10:00 the morning, the mayor arrived with her press detail. The cameras started rolling, capturing the bustling, joyful energy inside the clinic. We stood together in front of the massive reception desk for the ribbon cutting. The mayor gave a beautiful, standardized political speech about community resilience. But the moment that completely broke me, the moment that validated every single tear I had shed over the past 3 years, was when Professor Sterling stepped up to the wooden podium. She adjusted the microphone, looked out at the crowd, and then looked directly at me. 3 years ago, Professor Sterling began, her voice echoing clearly through the lobby. I sat in a university hall and watched an incredibly brilliant, desperately exhausted young woman walk across a stage to receive her medical degree entirely alone. She had no family cheering for her in the stands. She had no safety net to fall back on. Society tells us that without those things, you are destined to fail. The room went completely silent. I felt Barnaby put a heavy, supportive hand on my left shoulder. Casper stood on my right, grinning proudly. But Dr. Elowin did not fail, Sterling continued, her eyes shining fiercely. Because instead of letting that empty space destroy her, she decided to fill it. She built her own family. She built it out of loyal friends, trusting investors, and a community that desperately needed a champion. She worked 8 zero-hour weeks in the trauma ward to fund this dream. She didn't ask for handouts from people who didn't respect her. She earned every single inch of this building with her own 2 hands. Today, we aren't just opening a medical clinic. We are celebrating a masterclass in absolute resilience. Elowin, we are also incredibly proud to be the family you chose. The entire room erupted into a deafening roar of applause. The mayor clapped loudly. Casper actually whistled. I stood there surrounded by flashing cameras, successful investors, and a community that loved me, tears streaming freely down my face. I didn't try to hide them this time. These weren't tears of grief or rejection. They were tears of pure, absolute victory. I had won. The absolute high of the grand opening carried me straight through the entire morning. By 1:00 the afternoon, the press had finally packed up their heavy equipment. The mayor had departed to her next scheduled event, and the catering crew was quietly clearing away the empty pastry platters. I was sitting in my private office, taking a brief moment to breathe and eat a leftover sandwich, when my personal mobile phone aggressively vibrated across the desk. I glanced at the screen. It was a number I didn't recognize, which usually meant a vendor or a new patient inquiry. I casually answered it. Dr. Elowin speaking. You are an absolute cold-blooded monster. A shrill, furious voice screamed directly into my ear. I instantly pulled the phone an inch away from my head, wincing at the sheer volume. It was Saffron, my sister, the golden child. She must have borrowed a colleague's phone because I had completely ignored her calls on her main line all morning. Hello to you too, Saffron. How was the spa retreat in the Cotswolds? Did you get the deep tissue massage or just the basic Swedish? I asked, my voice dripping with casual, icy sarcasm. Do not play cute with me, Elowin. Mum has been hysterically crying in the living room for 3 straight hours. Dad is so furious he's threatening to fire his entire legal team just to have someone to yell at. How could you do something so incredibly humiliating to your own flesh and blood? You locked them out on a public street in front of a hired photographer. You sent that vicious email to Aunt Susan and Uncle David. The entire extended family is texting me, asking why our parents were banned from your event. I took a slow, deliberate bite of my sandwich, chewed it completely, swallowed, and leaned back in my chair. I simply enforced a strict VIP guest list, Saffron. It is standard operating procedure for a high-profile city event. They didn't contribute to the clinic, so they didn't make the cut. It is a very simple mathematical equation. They are your parents. They raised you. They drove all that way just to celebrate with you and celebrate your stupid little clinic, and you humiliated them for no reason, she shrieked. No reason? I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that held zero humor. Let's review the facts, counselor. 3 years ago, they completely abandoned me on my medical school graduation day to hold your hand in Zurich. 2 years ago, Dad laughed directly in my face and called my life stream a pathetic charity case. Mum told me I was an embarrassment and should go marry a rich surgeon. 3 months ago, I sent you all formal invitations to this exact event. You ignored them and then explicitly told me you were too busy getting a pedicure to attend. Saffron stammered for a second, clearly caught off guard by the rapid-fire recitation of their exact sins. That was different. We were busy. We had career obligations. You can't hold a grudge forever, Elowen. They were trying to make an effort today. They weren't trying to make an effort, Saffron. They were trying to hijack my success for a free photo opportunity, because they realized I actually made something of myself without their money, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly, quiet register. I am not holding a grudge. I am simply matching the exact energy this family has given me for 29 years. You all taught me that family only shows up when it's convenient and profitable. I learned the lesson perfectly. Congratulations on your promotion, Saffron. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone before she could scream another word. I immediately went into my settings and blocked that number too. I didn't feel a single shred of guilt. I just felt incredibly, wonderfully light. That evening, the celebration moved from the sterile, brightly lit clinic lobby to a private, dimly lit dining room at the most exclusive seafood restaurant overlooking the Thames. This wasn't a public relations event. This was a highly private, closed-door dinner hosted by Barnaby Thorne to formally celebrate the launch with our core investors and the medical board. We were sitting around a massive circular table, drinking expensive bottles of wine and eating fresh oysters. Barnaby casually tapped his expensive crystal glass with a silver spoon to get everyone's attention. To Dr. Elowen, Barnaby declared, raising his glass high, for proving that you can absolutely build a profitable, sustainable medical model without sacrificing your soul or your sanity. Cheers! Cheers! The table echoed, the sound of crystal clinking filling the room. As the waiters moved in to clear the appetizer plates, Barnaby leaned over toward my chair, a dark, incredibly amused smirk playing on his face. I thought you should know, Barnaby murmured quietly so only I could hear. Your father called my private office line at exactly 2 this afternoon. He was absolutely screaming. Sounded like a man having a severe coronary event. I paused with my wine glass halfway to my mouth, my stomach tightening instinctively. Did he threaten you? Barnaby, I am so sorry. I know his accounting firm handles some of your subsidiary tax accounts. Barnaby let out a loud, booming laugh that caused Dr. Khan to look over at us curiously. Threaten me? Oh, he certainly tried. He aggressively demanded to know why I was financially backing a disrespectful, ungrateful child. He actually threatened to completely pull his firm's accounting services from my entire supply chain portfolio if I didn't force you to issue a public apology and put his name on the clinic's donor wall. My jaw physically dropped. The sheer, blinding arrogance of my father was staggering. What did you say to him? Barnaby took a slow sip of his expensive red wine, his eyes dancing with malicious delight. I explicitly reminded your father that his entire accounting firm represents exactly 2% of my total corporate portfolio. I told him that his daughter is a brilliant visionary who just built a multi-million-pound asset from scratch, while he is nothing but an overgrown toddler throwing a tantrum because he couldn't get his picture in the paper. I told him to go ahead and cancel the contracts because I was planning on firing his firm anyway. Then I hung up on him. A profound wave of shock, followed instantly by a massive surge of immense gratitude, washed over me. Barnaby, you didn't have to lose a vendor over my family drama. I didn't lose anything of value, Elowen. I gained an incredible partner in you, he said firmly. Just as the main courses were being served, my phone buzzed in my bag. It was a forwarded email notification. Despite having blocked all of my parents' known email addresses, Philippa had apparently created a brand new generic account just to bypass my filters. The subject line read, "A generous offer for the Haven Clinic from the family." Curiosity getting the better of me, I quickly opened it under the table. The email was a masterpiece of desperate, transparent manipulation. It completely glossed over the horrific scene at the front door that morning. Instead, Philippa wrote a flowery, highly formal paragraph stating that she and Alistair were so incredibly moved by the news coverage of my clinic that they wanted to immediately pledge a totally unrestricted philanthropic donation of £50,000. The only catch? The final sentence of the email explicitly outlined their terms. We simply request that a prominent bronze plaque recognizing the Alistair Family Foundation be immediately installed in the main reception lobby, and that a formal press release with a family photograph be issued to the business journals next week. I stared at the glowing screen, almost wanting to laugh out loud at the absolute absurdity of it. They were literally trying to buy their way into my success. They thought £50,000 was enough to instantly erase 3 decades of neglect, the empty graduation chairs, and the humiliating dinner rejection. They thought my integrity had a price tag. I quickly forwarded the email directly to Caspar, who was sitting across the table. I watched him discreetly check his phone, read the email, and violently roll his eyes. I typed a rapid reply to my mother's new address. The Haven Clinic only accepts donations from individuals who align strictly with our core values of community, integrity, and genuine support. We do not sell naming rights to repair damaged public relations. Keep your money. Do not contact me again. I hit send, permanently blocked the new address, and picked up my wine glass, turning my absolute, undivided attention back to the wonderful people who actually deserved my time. 6 months later, the chaotic dust had finally settled, and the Haven Community Clinic wasn't just surviving, it was absolutely thriving beyond our most wildly optimistic projections. We had officially treated over 3,000 unique patients in the underserved district. We had successfully partnered with several major hospitals to drastically reduce their A&E overflow. We had just secured a massive government healthcare grant totaling £500,000 to fully fund our new mobile dental unit. The media ran a massive follow-up feature on the clinic's unprecedented success, calling it a revolutionary, scalable model for urban healthcare. I was invited to speak at medical conferences across the country. Barnaby and Amara were already scouting real estate locations for our second facility in North London. And my parents? They were completely, utterly absent from every single second of it. Through the unavoidable, highly efficient grapevine of London's elite business circles, I heard exactly what happened in the fallout of the grand opening. Word had quickly spread about Alistair's disastrous, unhinged phone call threatening Barnaby Thorne. You simply do not threaten a billionaire philanthropist in a tight-knit corporate community and expect it to stay a secret. The narrative shifted rapidly against them. Alistair lost several major corporate accounting clients who quietly expressed extreme discomfort with how he treated his own daughter. Philippa's carefully curated, perfect social circles suddenly became incredibly chilly, politely excluding her from charity event planning committees. It turns out that publicly boycotting your daughter's medical graduation and then attempting to aggressively bribe your way into her wildly successful philanthropic project is a phenomenally bad look for the family brand. They had gambled everything on Saffron being their golden ticket to high society. And while Saffron was making decent money at her law firm, she wasn't doing anything that commanded the profound, universal respect of building a clinic from the ground up. They had bet on the wrong horse, and the social consequences were absolutely devastating to their fragile egos. I received one final, pathetic letter from their expensive solicitor 2 months ago, formally informing me that Alistair and Philippa were desperately trying to update their legal will to leave a portion of their estate to my clinic as a legacy gift. I didn't even bother replying. I simply ran the heavy parchment paper through the clinic's industrial shredder. It was a quiet Friday evening. The clinic was finally closed for the weekend. The staff had gone home to their families, and the long hallways were silent. I was sitting in my private office, finishing up the last of the week's patient charts. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the window, casting a warm golden glow over the room. I leaned back in my chair and looked up at the wall opposite my desk. Hanging right there in the absolute center of the wall, slightly crooked because I was terrible with a hammer, was my medical degree. It wasn't encased in expensive custom mahogany like my father's accounting certificates. It was housed in a cheap black plastic frame I had bought on clearance at a discount shop. I stared at that cheap plastic frame, and I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of absolute peace. Every single time I looked at that degree, I didn't see the crushing disappointment of the 3 empty chairs in the 7th row. I didn't hear the humiliating laughter from the mahogany dining table. I didn't feel the sting of being the secondary, discarded child. Instead, I saw the blinding, brilliant resilience of a woman who refused to be broken. I saw the countless late-night pizzas with Casper. I saw the fierce, unyielding mentorship of Professor Sterling. I saw the heavy gold pen of Barnaby Thorne signing a check that changed thousands of lives. I saw the faces of the terrified, sick mothers who walked through my front doors every day and finally found someone who would listen to them in their own language. My parents had spent my entire life trying to dictate my worth based on their shallow, materialistic metrics. They tried to break me by withholding their love. But in the end, their absolute absence was the greatest gift they could have ever given me. It forced me into the fire. It forced me to build an empire out of pure spite and then slowly transform that spite into genuine, world-changing love for my community. I stood up, grabbed my white coat off the back of the chair, and turned off the office light. The clinic was waiting for Monday, and I was exactly where I was meant to be.